this. I don't know why.
There we go, it loaded finally. So today we're going to talk about when to tell and when to show. Now I know in a lot of my other videos I've talked about the fact that you should show and not tell. That is still correct. However, there are times when you can tell certain details and it actually does help enhance your story. The problem is that oftentimes people go lean full into tell and then they just tell you the story. That's not good storytelling. Good storytelling, funnily enough, is not telling your story. It's showing people your story. If you just say, she is mad and she is 13 and she is angsty and she has black hair, like, that's boring. However, if you say, like, she looked down at her notebook broodingly, thinking about her next satanic ritual to get rid of the cheerleaders, that's way more dramatic.
Also, that sounds like something I would do.
It sounds way more dramatic and way more intense, and that is showing all of those things. Moving on. There are times when you do want to tell, though, because if you purely show, you can lose the reader. Because there are moments when you need to tell the reader certain details that you just can't show, or if you show, it's not clear enough. However, keep in mind that there is telling and then there's tactful telling as well. Today we're going to be talking about tactful telling. When to tactfully tell versus show. If you're just straight telling, that is still bad. Oh no. It won't erase. It's good enough.
Sure that you use Expo?
I did. I also cleaned the whiteboard though, so I think it's fickle now. It's like I was wet when you put marker on me, and now I'm not gonna work. Anyway, so the first one we're gonna talk about is internal dialogue. Now, obviously, you can do thoughts, which is a great way to show how they're feeling. However, through those thoughts, you can also tell us how they are feeling. You can also tell us what they're thinking, too, if you just are like, hey, I don't want to go through their whole thought process right now, I just want to get straight to the point. So you can tell us, you can tell and show, and the thing is, you've got to mix both. So you could go like, she grit her teeth and stared out the window, thinking about how much she wished she could push Pramila out of it, or something like that, you know, if they're really angry. This shows you that they're angry, however, it also is telling you exactly what she's thinking. It is telling, technically, but it is tactfully telling, because it is also showing details to help sandwich that, make it a little nicer. You can also tell through internal dialogue directly, too. For example, I wish I could smack that grin off his face. You can put that in italics and make that a thought, and that is very much telling that she wishes she could smack the grin off his face. However, it's also making it extra clear in a way that feels more tactful. Alright. Oh, that one, yeah, see, that one erased easily. I just need to not put marker on it when Windex was previously used. Alright, so we're going to talk next about missing scenes and clarification. So, there are a lot of times when scenes are missing because they are not important to the plot. However, you do need to clarify that these scenes are missing. Otherwise, we'll be incredibly confused. If you go from someone lying, dying on the ground, and then all of a sudden they wake up covered in bandages, and you're just like, oh, okay, this is like 10 minutes later, maybe, or 2 hours later. If it's 4 weeks later, we need to know it's 4 weeks later, because otherwise the reader is going to assume it's a minimal amount of time that has passed. Unless told otherwise, the reader will always assume it's a minimal amount of time. At most 8 hours. If it is any longer than 8 hours, you definitely need to tell the reader, because otherwise they're going to be lost. Another thing that needs to be pointed out is if there is anything that isn't important detail-wise, but it's important that you know what happened to get to where they are. Here's an example. They hiked for several hours, seeing nothing but the occasional bird or squirrel. So Evelyn wasn't surprised when her little sister whined, "How much longer?" That shows us that her sister's whining, that shows us that her sister's frustrated. However, it also tells us they've been hiking for several hours. You don't need to show us all of that hiking in like 4 pages. You can skip that and instead just summarize it as they've been hiking for several hours. and then you lead back into the showing. The issue is when you start telling and then you don't stop telling. So the problem would have been if you'd said they hiked for several hours, seeing nothing but the occasional bird or squirrel. So Evelyn wasn't surprised when her little sister was whining. She hated that she whined so much. It was super annoying. And it's like, okay, we're moving into telling only territory. However, telling things that we need to know but aren't important is very overall important to have. It's also important to have those clarifications, because if you just said she wasn't surprised when her sister started whining, you'd be like, why is her sister whining? Why do we care that she's whining? What is she whining about? And even if she says how much longer, they could be in a car, they could be in a plane, they could be they could be swimming, like they could be on a boat. You have no idea. So it gives you a little bit of clarification and context without needing to give 4 pages worth of them hiking boringly. All right. Next is emotions. Now, emotions can be shown, and it's great to show emotions. I would say 90% of the time you want to show emotions, not tell emotions. However, every once in a while, it's important to tell an emotion, purely because some emotions are deeper than the surface. For example, if I'm clenching my fists, you can tell I'm probably either anxious or mad. And based on context, you can kind of then glean which one it is. However, if I am mad at a specific person for a specific thing, or I want to do something because of these emotions, you don't know just because I'm mad that I want to do something. You just know I'm mad. So, for example, with anger, he was so furious that he had to clench his fist to keep himself from starting a fight. This is telling. However, it is tactfully telling because you are showing that he's clenching his fists, but you are also telling us that he wants to start a fight. That he's not just angry, he's so angry he wants to start a fight. Again, this is typically a 10% margin. You typically want to show us more emotions than you tell us. However, sometimes telling can be important because if you tell us he wants to try and keep himself from starting a fight, and then the guy just keeps egging on the other guy, and then finally one of the characters punches the other guy in the face, then you see it coming. It's good foreshadowing technique. However, if they're just angry and you don't really need to foreshadow that they're going to do something about that anger or something like that, not a huge deal. Alright, I'm going to scroll down a little bit because this is a long thing. Facts needed for context. A lot of times the issue with showing is that you're trying to give us context through visual cues, but sometimes we need verbal cues. Sometimes we can't catch on just by seeing something. A great example of this, though a scary movie, it is PG-13, but it's scary, is I Am Legend. The reason this movie does this so well is because of the fact that he is doing video diaries and things like that, just in case someone else comes across his research, because he's a researcher researching this disease that has turned basically the whole population into semi-zombies. And he's trying to cure the zombie virus. However, without him saying those things directly and tactfully telling us it through the story, I'd just be sitting there going, why is the whole world exploded and they're zombies? Just why? I'm confused. Why is he doing that? Why is he doing that? Why is he doing this? They answer a lot of questions by just giving us those facts through tactful telling. However, they do also a great job of doing a cinematic version of showing us all of these things. So they do a good balance of tactfully telling and showing. Tactfully telling fills in the gaps that showing cannot fill in for us. Moving on. With stating a fact, a great example is Jessica rushed to the river. She only had 4 minutes before the poison would set in. You have to tell us that. If there, unless you want to be really dramatic and do kind of, like those movies. No, Jack, we only have 4 minutes. You can do that, but just keep in mind there is a lot of dialogue like that where it's just kind of telling something that the character should already know. If the character should already know that, but the reader doesn't know it, then just give it for the reader's benefit. Don't do Maid and Butler dialogue. Maid and Butler dialogue is when they're talking about something that they already know about. Unless the character would actually do this, it's not actually great writing. For example, if the reason it's called maid and butler dialogue is because they used to do it a lot in 50s movies, where the maid would go, remember, the master always comes home at 7 o'clock. And the butler's like, yes, of course, I know that. And then I'm sitting here like, why are you talking about it then? And it's the same issue with writing. If the person is like being obnoxious and is like, remember, mom comes home at 7, and then the little sister is like, I know, Jillian, then it makes sense. But if you're just doing it for the sake of the reader, that dialogue can actually feel really jarring, which is when it's nice to tactfully tell it through a fact. So you have her rushing to the river, which is showing that she's panicked, but then you tell us she only has 4 minutes before the poison would set in. And so as a result, you're tactfully telling through this sentence. All right, next thing is backstory. Sometimes backstory needs to be tactfully told. You can't always just show us backstory. It is a great way of showing, it is a great way to let the reader get to know the character if you show us backstory physically. It can be very intriguing. Another great thing that I Am Legend as well is the fact that they give backstory through flashbacks and through his nightmares and dreams. That is a great way to get backstory through showing. However, you can also tell us that backstory through tactful telling, because sometimes concepts are necessary that we don't understand, and if the reader doesn't understand too long, they get upset, and then they stop reading. If they're just lost, they get angry. I don't know about you, but when I'm reading a book, I don't want to feel lost for 20 minutes. That just makes me frustrated.
True.
So, for example, Willow couldn't understand the concept of sadness. Having been locked away on an island with no death or sickness or pain made it so the emotion was incredibly foreign to her. You're telling us exactly what her backstory is, however, you're telling it to us in one sentence summary before you're going to move on to more showing of what's happening in the scene. That way you're getting the backstory out of the way without distracting. That's the one problem you can run into with backstory, and why I Am Legend did it well. By doing it through his dreams and nightmares at night, they continued the story moving forward without interrupting the current story, because you knew where he was in the current story. In the current story, he was unconscious. And so as a result, even though it was reflections of the past, you knew he was dreaming, and you knew we'd come back to the present any minute now. Whereas sometimes you don't have time to do that. Like someone's dying, or something's super intense, or someone is injured and in need of help. Telling someone's whole backstory in the middle of them being injured and needing help and dying, not exactly the best time to sidetrack. Especially because then when you jump back into the regular, people are like, wait, I don't even remember what's happening, because for 4 pages we've been in the past. So this is when it can be incredibly helpful to summarize that backstory real quick before you move on. All right. Okay. My handwriting is getting progressively sloppier. Introducing side characters. So, when you introduce side characters, sometimes it is too hard to introduce them all at once. And in fact, it would be a bad thing to do that. For example, if Avatar: The Last Airbender started in the middle of the series and there's 20 characters you need to know, you'd be like, stress. But because of the fact that they introduced 3, and then a 4th, and then a 5th, and then a 6th, it felt nice and easy for us. However, if you can't avoid that, and you have to start in the middle of the story, and you have to start with a big fat cast of characters that you don't even know, you can't handle it, then it's good to tactfully tell to help introduce side characters and introduce kind of what their lives are like. For example, Quentin noted the small, Quentin noted the small man looked like a mouse that had its tail stepped on too many times. He watched as the man's blue eyes darted to the left and the right, anxiously waiting trouble. So, this helps introduce this side character very well. It is telling us that what he looks like. Exactly. It's not showing us through action what he looks like. It's not showing us why he's anxious. It's simply telling us this man is anxious and he looks kind of like a mouse, kind of hunched over, kind of. And we don't know why, but we don't necessarily care why. What's important is we know what he looks like now, and we know that there's something going on. This is a great way to help introduce side characters when you have too many characters. Because obviously if you tell us the hair color, eye color, skin color, etc. of every single character, that's going to get really difficult to keep track of. If you introduce it slowly, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, that's no problem. But if you're doing it all at once, sometimes it's good to give a summation of what the character looks like without specific details, especially if they're not a super important character. If it's like, you meet this lawyer 5 times in this detective series or whatever, you don't really need to know exactly what the lawyer looks like. Alright. You can also use it to introduce a large cast. So that was talking about individual characters and introducing them. However, you can also use it to introduce your whole entire large cast all at once. For example, Katie and her posse all gossiped about the most recent vacation she went to her mother's elegant mansion in the hills, and it made Ellen shrink, feeling inferior. You're telling us that Ellen feels inferior, and you're telling us exactly what Katie's talking about. However, the reason it's tactful is because of the fact that you're giving us a summary. This could take up a whole paragraph that may just not be necessary because you need to move on with the plot. Maybe Katie is her nemesis, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to tell us all about Katie's life all the time. This is kind of similar to how with Zuko, when he was introduced, they told us a lot about what he was like through other people's rumors and suspicions of him, right? However, they didn't just tell you his whole backstory up front, and they didn't just introduce his whole backstory and his whole family all at once. Instead, they kind of slowly introduced what he was like through telling us a little bit about his backstory. Alright. Now we're going to talk about the don'ts, because unfortunately telling has a lot of don'ts. There's a reason why people say show, don't tell. The reason why is because of the fact that telling kills the action most of the time, unless it's in the prior circumstances that I just listed. For example, if it sounds like a textbook, don't do it. If it sounds like you're just stating facts about the plot and the characters and what they look like, that is boring, right? No one likes reading a textbook. I don't know about you, but I don't like reading textbooks. And the reason why is because they just state facts, right? They're not telling us, and Amelia Earhart rode bravely into the storm. They're telling us Amelia Earhart died in this year. And so it's kind of boring. The action isn't as intense because the action is already happened and you were already told exactly what happened. It'd be the equivalent of, for example, saying, there was a cool battle and they won. Not interesting. However, if you say, and he leaned left and parried, and he finally swiped him down, but just as he swiped him down, he felt hot blood falling down and realized he too had been stabbed. You know, that's so much more intense. That gives us so much more emotion. Whereas just saying, they fought, he won, woo, is really boring. Tell us what happened. Don't tell us what happened, show us what happened. Next thing is also emotions. Like I said, 90% of the time you want to be able to show emotions. For example, saying she is sad all the time is going to be boring. However, if you say she fought back hot stinging tears, or a tear rolled down her cheek and she turned away to avoid him seeing it, or whatever, that is going to make it far more interesting and far more emotionally gripping for our readers. However, like I said, you can tell emotions if the emotions need specific foreshadowing / clarification. If you're like, hey, she is crying because she is about ready to leave, then give us some form of foreshadowing by saying, like, she turned away, she couldn't bear to look at him knowing that she was about ready to leave. That's telling us something, but it's because we need to know that. It's necessary information. Don't tell us unnecessary details that don't lead to a point as well. You can tell us fun details that are necessary to plot, character development, or world building. But if it's not important to the character, plot, or world building, then why do we care? If you are going to tell us unnecessary details, tell us why they matter. Tell us why they connect to character. Tell us why they connect to world building. Tell us why they connect to the plot. Even if it's just a hint, you don't have to tell us exactly, like, this relates to the plot because blah. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, for example, if her leaving is part of prophecy, then you can say she turned away, the tear falling down her cheek. She didn't want him to see, in spite of the fact that they didn't want her to leave because it would fulfill the prophecy. She knew she had to. You know, that is tactful telling. It tells us, hey, this is important to the plot, without saying, hey, this is important to the plot. Or alternatively, if it's building up a character, like with the fight scene earlier, you could say something else too and add an extra telling line and say he fought back the urge to punch him because he knew if he punched another person, he just might go to jail. And it's like, okay, that gives us a lot of good context about him as a character and why this needed to be told to us, why this mattered. Or if it's a world building thing, you can always be like, the vines grew up thick around the tree. However, she knew that if she stared at the vines too long, they would wither and die, for they were bound by secrecy or something like that. That makes us know, okay, so she's unable to look at this tree for too long because it's sacred or something like that. That's a good world building thing. All right, next thing. Don't tell us dialogue. It is don't tell us dialogue if it is important, and if it is unimportant, do tell us dialogue. So, for example, if it is incredibly unimportant that someone went on Christmas vacation, you can be like in the Harry Potter series, for instance, they'll do that a lot, where it's like, yeah, I went and visited my brother for Christmas, and it's like, that's cool. Is it super important, though? Not really. So they summarize the conversation by saying, Ron talked about visiting his brother for Christmas and all that. Cool. Now that conversation is done and over with, and we don't need to waste a whole paragraph on them having a conversation about, like, I went and visited my brother and he changed dragons. What? That's so cool, bro. And, like, we don't need that. We just need to summarize the conversation as he talked about his vacation seeing his brother. The end. However, if it is super important, don't skip it. Don't just tell us, hey, she told him about the prophecy and everything that would happen if she was to leave. She told him that she didn't want to leave him. She told him that everything was going to be okay. Like, no, show us that emotion. Show us that scene. Show us her, turning away from him, unable to tell him that she has to go even though she doesn't want to. That is going to give us a lot more drama and a lot more intensity and a lot more emotional resonance than just saying she has to go even though she doesn't want to. And so she told him, I don't want to go. Like, that makes it sound a little robotic too. It loses that emotion. All right. Any questions about when to tell versus when not to tell? Cool. Then I will just turn off the video for today. Reminder again, just because it's almost to the deadline, first chapters for the first chapter contest are due November 30th. Please get them in before we close, preferably 45 minutes before we close, because once those doors are closed and locked, we are not letting anyone in to submit their story. I am sorry, but I said you needed it 15 minutes before we close. It's 5 minutes after we close. I'm sorry, but I told you 15 minutes before. That being said, we also have the Cozy Christmas Mystery Contest coming up, which will be due on December 21st. Okay, and I'm going to turn off the video.